Good morning. I read to you from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, verse 1, and then from 7 to 14. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this person your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or your sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." This morning's homily asks the question, what message do people see in us? In a simple yet profound statement, Luke captures a truth often overlooked in Luke 14 verse 1. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. And that truth is in the last phrase. He was being carefully watched. One of the most important facts of being a Christian is that our lives are the greatest witness we can show to an unbelieving world. But when we look at the way Christians live today, what do our lives reflect to the world? The public face of the church is what is shared on social media. The image of the church is one of dishonesty, avarice, and questionable morals. When unbelievers speak of the church, they refer to a lifestyle of wealth, prosperity, and greed. The image of the church, and indeed of Christians, is one of disbelief in the practices that have come to define the church today. We hear of people adopting all sorts of titles, like apostles, prophets, bishops. These are arbitrary titles assumed by those who have become the face of the church today. And we hear of outrageous claims being made with no proof that anything claimed has actually happened or can be factually proven. What is being taught in some churches is outlandish nonsense, and yet these charlatans somehow have so many followers. People who do not question the practices they are exposed to. And it is those messages and practices that condemn the church that cause people to ridicule us. Recently, there was an article about a pastor in Johannesburg who died a year ago. He's not buried yet because he had claimed he will be resurrected. The undertaker cannot do anything unless the family give consent. Bizarrely, his church continues, and the members largely do not question this utter nonsense of a supposed resurrection. But the church, as such, suffers ridicule because of the deceased's claims. Similarly, there was a strongly worded statement from the Catholic Bishops' Conference lamenting the silence of the church since democracy. Whereas the church was the strident voice challenging the heresy of apartheid, our silence today implies acquiescence of current corrupt government practices. The church had stood on the side of the poor, but now we've grown alarmingly silent on so many social justice issues. And we forget we are being carefully watched. What lies beneath this desire for titles is status. This is also reflected in the desire of many so-called Christians to belong to what are perceived to be successful churches. It's likely a human trait to want to be part of something successful, something big and grand. Perhaps this is why some reality TV shows draw such large viewership, and why people gravitate towards having a selfie taken with a celebrity. It gives you boasting rights, as it were. However, Jesus, visiting at the home of a prominent Pharisee, is not seduced by his host status. Jesus treats everyone the same, and he will use whatever context he is in to teach the people valuable life lessons. At the heart of the Luke passage lies the teaching of not being seduced by status. And Jesus teaches the people about humility in an intriguing manner. Make less of yourself to avoid humiliation is the essence of what Jesus teaches. Do not be driven by your ego, as it can so easily work against you. Humility does not strip you of dignity, but could in fact enhance your dignity. While others may desire status, recognition, humility is rewarded differently. Ego gives you a sense of entitlement, whereas humility is rewarded with genuine recognition. Using a wedding as a parable, Jesus teaches us the difference between ego and humility. When you aspire to be seen as important, that desire could be humiliating. Think less of yourself and let others elevate your status. If you pursue what your ego dictates, the reality may be very different, says Luke in chapter 14, verse 9. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. If you remain humble, others will recognize your true worth, and they will reward you accordingly, says Luke in chapter 14, verse 10. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. Egoists are solely centered on the self. They are concerned only with how they will benefit in life. For them, it is about selfish gain. A true believer, one who is aware of what God has done for him or her, knows it is only through God's amazing grace that they are blessed in life. But a true believer also knows the value of sharing with others. And the writer to the Hebrews reminds us that we ought not to hold on to what we have, but that we should share with others, especially the destitute. He says in Hebrews 13 verse 16, and do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. As the writer says, God is pleased with our willingness to sacrifice, to make life a better place for those who need it. Jesus spent his ministry working to make others' lives better. He healed those who needed healing. He offered hope to those who had no hope. He changed the way people see themselves so that they were better able to reflect their God-given potential. He taught us about reaching out to others, about not being restricted by social dictates. He taught us about sacrifice, by obediently going to the cross, of suffering for the sake of others, even though they failed to appreciate the offer of grace. He engaged the rich, the corrupt, like Zacchaeus, the powerful, like going to the home of a prominent Pharisee. He taught us the value of humbly accepting the gift of others, like the gift of expensive perfume used to wash his feet. He taught us the value of being non-judgmental, like with the woman caught in adultery. He taught us the value of sincere friendships like those he had with his disciples. He taught us the value of seeking what matters most in life. In Matthew 6 verse 33, Jesus teaches, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness." He taught us about forgiveness, even in the face of adversity from those who opposed you. Says Jesus in Luke 23 verse 34, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." He taught us about selfless love, recorded in John 15 verse 13. "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." What motivates our occupation of leadership in the church? Is it our perception of power over others? Is it the misdirected glamour we attach to the office? Sadly, there are some who aspire to leadership positions, but for the wrong reasons. They pursue the title and status they think comes with the office, but lack leadership qualities. They selfishly seek the recognition, but show no humility, as Christ set as an example. As leaders in God's church, we are in service of those we lead. Jesus said of himself in Mark 10 verse 45, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." More than that, he expressly told us in John 13 verse 15 to follow his example when he said, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." Once more, Jesus shows us by his example what his disciples ought to reflect in this world. He did not merely tell them and us what to do, but showed by his own example how we should live. This is also reflected in his challenge to his host about not inviting those of equal stature, but to consciously invite those who cannot repay you in kind. Their gratitude and thanks for your generosity is what matters. Records Luke in chapter 14 verses 13 and 14. "When you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Speaking in Matthew's Gospel about those who seek rewards for services rendered, Jesus emphatically states, "They have their reward." Instead, Jesus teaches us to work for a reward from our Father in heaven. In Matthew 6 verse 4 he says, "Your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." This is the same message he gives to the Pharisee in Luke's Gospel. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This world thrives on recognition, on status, all driven by ego. And it is a fine line we walk in not being seduced by ego. As leadership, we should not seek the good words from those we lead, but instead derive our joy from seeing how our leadership positively impacts their lives. If those in political leadership were truly the servants of the people, they would not engage in corrupt practices, nor desire personal gain from occupying any post. Knowing they are making a positive difference in the lived experiences of those who rely on their leadership should be their motivation for leading the people. Perhaps then we would have less wars. Perhaps health care would be made available and affordable for all people, regardless of your economic status. Perhaps then we would see a commitment to address climate change and a greater care for the environment. Perhaps then we'll see a real commitment to addressing gender-based violence and a drastic reduction of violence against children. Perhaps then we'll see a real commitment to economic development and a reduction of poverty. For real transformation to happen, we need the church to truly reflect the example Christ set for us. Knowing we are being carefully watched should serve as motivation for us to examine the witness our lives offer to an unbelieving world. The church, the body of Christ, should reflect the values Christ teaches us. In so doing, we will give credence to his mission call in Matthew 28:19 and 20. Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. May it be so for all of us. Amen.